everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're talking about 5 of my most favorite feminist fiction stories. If you're new here, my name is Nikita. On this channel we talk about feminist and BIPOC stories quite a bit, so if that's something that you like, please feel free to subscribe and give this video a like. Today we're talking about some of my favorite BIPOC feminist stories. I mean, some of them are BIPOC, others are not. And I can almost guarantee you that there's some of them that you've never heard of before. I mean, if I'm wrong, feel free to challenge me below. So everyone has a different interpretation of what is feminist fiction. My interpretation is that feminist fiction is basically any story that centers around a or multiple female perspectives and offers us this great overview and unpacking of like a political of the politics of being a woman, you know, the cultural and the economic lens as well of being a woman, all along with great storytelling. Some feminist fiction books like really obviously further this idea of equity and of gender equity and equality. Others are a little bit more subtle about it, but that's usually the undertone that I like to look for when I'm reading feminist fiction. And some of them can be lighthearted and fun as well. Okay, the very first book that I have as a recommendation for this is The Legend of Lakshmi Prasad by Twinkle Khanna. It's nice and shiny, but this is called The Legend of Lakshmi Prasad by Twinkle Khanna. If you're not familiar, this is Twinkle Khanna's, I think it was her second book. Twinkle Khanna is a Bollywood actress turned author, but before you roll your eyes at that, she is actually a scholar. She pokes fun at herself for being a scholar and then becoming an actress, and in a sense like going back to writing. But she's an incredible writer, and this is a collection of short stories. It's a very, very quick book, like you can see. And one of the stories in here is a legend of Lakshmi Prasad. And I picked it up for this short story, and all the short stories in it are really, really great. They're all set in India, some present day, some a little bit historical. But the namesake of this book is the story that's basically around this young girl, Lakshmi Prasad, where she notices the girls in her village are marrying really early, and they're entering some of these like abusive marriages or less than ideal, sometimes unsafe situations, all for a sense of financial stability and security. So she comes up with an idea that changes the face of her village forever and of all the girls and women living in that village. Essentially, every time a girl is born, the family plants a mango tree in the village. And this is sort of the girl's investment, you know, portfolio in a sense. And when she grows up, she has a thriving mango tree or multiple mango trees. She can, you know, sell those mangoes, she can sell them, she can juice them up, she can do whatever she wants to generate an income for herself. And that's the story in essence, but I thought it was so endearing. All the stories in here was so endearing and so accurate in capturing the economic experience and the political experience of being a woman in a rural India. There's another short story in here where a guy is really obsessed with the idea of sanitary napkins and pads and female hygiene products, and he's so curious about them and he wants to understand them to support women, and his family is horrified. And as you can see, the stories in here are really great, super endearing. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Up next is a book that I have spoken about on this channel previously, but I don't see many other people talking about it, and I don't think this book gets as much love as it deserves, and that is The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. I spoke about this last year, and I read it from my book club, my personal book club in my life, and it was so good. This is a debut author, by the way. This is an Indo-American woman. This is loosely inspired by the story of the Bandit Queen in India in the 90s, I believe, but it's not the story about her, but it's loosely inspired by her. This basically is set in rural India, and I don't know if it's present time or it was a little bit if it was a little bit historical, but it's set in rural India in a village. I believe it's in the western part of India in Gujarat, but it basically follows main character Geeta, whose husband just like one day just like ups and leaves and like runs away. But everybody else in the village assumes that she's killed him, and so now she has this air and this reputation around her of being a villainess, and everyone's scared of her. And Geeta loves that because that means nobody's bothering her, there's no sexual advances, unwanted sexual advances from men, people give her space, and they're afraid of her, and she loves that. Until All of the other women from the village start coming up to her, asking her to dispose of their husbands. This book is razor sharp. It is hilarious and it follows a really funny cast of women as they, work together to rid themselves of their abusive husbands and their problematic husbands. And of course, trigger warnings, there's some domestic violence in here, there's general violence in here, but it's done in such a humorous way. It's a very satirical book. I really enjoy dark satirical humor, and this is a feminist fiction mixed with comedy, mixed with female friendship drama, and a great story to boot. Just a heads up though, this does have some words of Gujarati in it. The copy that I have, I don't really see an appendix where you have translation of some of these words, but they're important to storytelling, but they're also very easily Googleable. You can Google them, and that's not a problem at all. And don't let that stop you from picking this book up. This is an incredible debut. I can't wait to see what this author does next. Now, the next two books in this category you may have heard of. One of them is quite popular, and one of them I have just been talking about it a lot, but the next one is one of my favorite books of all time. That is Erotic Stories for Punjabi Widows by Balli Kaur Jaswal. I did a podcast episode with her last year, this author. I will have it linked down below if you're interested in that, or up here, but this book was so great. This is one of the first BIPOC feminist books that I read. I read it years and years ago, and this is my original copy, and I've been trying to keep it very pristine. This is also a Reese Witherspoon book club pick. This is set in London, England, present day, and it follows Nikki, who's a young Punjabi woman who finds herself in between jobs. She decides to take up what seems to be an English teaching class at her local Gurdwara or her Sikh temple, until she shows up and she finds that her students, who are mainly these much older Punjabi women, are not really interested in learning English, and what becomes of those classes is more of this erotic storytelling. And so you have a lovely cast of older women, some of them older moms, some of them are grandmas, really navigating their own hidden parts of their sexuality through creative storytelling. And it's such an endearing novel. These women, you really see them basically find a sense of empowerment and freedom through sharing some of their fantasies, their sexual desires. There's a little a mystery element in here too, and just the narrative of what it means to be a South Asian Sikh woman is just so nicely woven into this. You see our main character Nikki really struggle with that too, her experience of culture and religion and how that intersects with her feminist identity. And then you also have these older women who may be judged as, the opposite of feminists, and what their expression of their femininity and fighting for gender equity looks like. It was great. It was lovely. There's also an element, I guess, of a bit of there's a thrilling element in here too. There's this moral police basically that finds out what is going on. And so this group finds their freedom of speech really threatened. I won't say more about this, but this was such a good book. You really have this unassuming set of characters, and there just isn't that much representation of older brown women in mainstream fiction. That too, feminist fiction. If they are portrayed, they're usually portrayed as villains or a little bit backwards or stuck in their ways. So this was so liberating in so many ways. The next book that I have is Asking for It by Louise O'Neill. I have not read this book. I don't have the personal copy of this book. I read it years and years ago. I actually need to buy a personal copy of it. But this is set in Ireland. It basically follows a teenage girl, Emma, who experiences sexual abuse and rape while she is drugged at a party. So big trigger warning right there. This book is triggering as heck. It shattered me. And what you see from there is just her unraveling of her psyche and the experience of being a trauma survivor and the resiliency of being a trauma survivor, and the narrative around women asking for it based on how they dress and the makeup that they wear. What I do remember about this book, that it was such a realistic, and is such a realistic, accurate portrayal of a woman who's experienced sexual violence, um, and her own journey through that mentally, really feeling like her body was not hers anymore. So she has to now work on reclaiming her body while at the same time bringing her perpetrators to justice, while at the same time fighting off slut shaming and victim blaming from the world around her. Again, this is a bit of a triggering book, but it was so beautifully done. I highly recommend this author and this book. And the last book that I have in this category is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis. I just noticed the spine on this is so faded from the sun shining onto my bookshelves. I need to figure out a solution here because I can't have my spines fading. Does it happen to anybody? Are you supposed to keep your library in your house curtained up? Anyway, Lessons in Chemistry, I think, was also a debut, came out last year. I absolutely loved it. It's now an Apple TV show. I have not seen it. I'm actually frankly scared to watch it because I don't want it to impact how I feel about the book. My friend watched it and she said it was a bit of a deviation from the book, but if you haven't read this book, let me tell you, the hype is so real. Like, it's real. Okay, whatever the hype you've heard about this book, it's real. I gave this 5 stars. I would give it more if I could. This is a historical feminine fiction. It's set in the 60s, and we follow our main character, who's a chemist named Elizabeth Zott, and you see her journey from, a master's student to a PhD student to having a kid, and now she finds herself leading a cooking show. But because she is a chemist, her take on the cooking show is very unique and it's very different, and it's very, very empowering. You have a couple different timelines in here. There's a lot of conversation around the past and the present. In the present day, it starts off with her being the host of this cooking show, and then you learn more about her past and how she came to be here. There's a tiny bit of romance in here, some trigger warnings. There is sexual violence in here as well. There is death and grief, and I cried in this book, but it was so good. My mom also actually read it last year, and she absolutely loved it too. Because one of the biggest, the premises of this book is what it is to be a professional woman in science in the 60s and navigate the misogyny and really this white man's world of science back in the day at that time. And it was such an accurate representation of that. All right, folks, those were 5 of my favorite feminist fictions. I have a lot more. I have a huge list of feminist fictions that I like. So if you want a part 2 of this video, give this video a thumbs up. Please hit subscribe. Let me know, is there any book on here that you hadn't heard about? And do any of these pique your interest? I would love to know which one you're going to be picking up from this video. Once again, thanks so much for being here. If you're not subscribed already, please hit subscribe, give this video a like. It really helps me out. And I will see you in my next video. Happy reading.